A narcissist, they can replicate externals and be a total fraud, but they can look so caring, so genuine. They're grooming you, they're love bombing you, they're doing all the things that make them look healthy, but your gut says something's off here. I'm not going to know this over the short term because a narcissist can create short term looking good, but they can't create long term looking good. And so I got to be willing to kind of watch over a period of time. How do they treat other people? Do they treat with respect? Are they honest in all situations? Do they allow all kinds of emotions? Are they trying to fit me into a box that suits them? One of the things that is part of soul murders, we had to shut down our gut, or neuroception. And it's kind of bringing it back to life and learning to listen to it again. That is so important. So what I want people to realize is,
Tim Fletcher, what is soul murder?
it's such an important topic to me in understanding complex trauma. So a way to understand complex trauma is a child is living in a place where they're not feeling safe and they're feeling overwhelmed. So they're getting hurt, their needs aren't being met, they've got this emotional pain and anger that they can't resolve. So let me just give you an example of what happens with that. So let's say that a child who comes into the world naturally wants to connect to people. They need to connect in order to survive. They're naturally very authentic. They naturally trust people. That's all built into just what an infant needs to do to survive. So they trust their caregivers. But let's say that dad's not there for them. He's working all the time. Dad is very angry and lashes out at them. Dad says you're too sensitive. Dad says you're too emotional. And so all of a sudden what they realize is, for me to survive in this family, I have to start shutting down parts of myself. So I can't be authentic anymore. So I got to murder authenticity. I can't now trust dad because dad's not safe. So I got to stop trusting people. I can't connect to people because every time I connect, I get rejected, I get judged, I get hurt. So let's murder connecting to people. And so I can't be emotional. I can't show certain emotions because then I get punished for those. So I got to shut down certain emotions or murder certain emotions. So basically what it's saying is, in order to survive, I have to shut down parts of myself or murder parts of my soul as to who I really am and become what other people want me to be in order to survive. And so a child begins to do kind of all of these different things. So it gradually kind of begins to spread. So they shut down certain emotions that make them vulnerable to getting punished or rejected. They shut down trust. They shut down creativity. They shut down authenticity. But then they also begin to shut down, if I care about people, then it hurts more if I lose people. And so let's stop caring about anything. So let's now shut down empathy. And then if I have a conscience, that actually, I now have to lie to survive, but then my conscience bothers me and says you're bad for lying all the time, and I got to keep secrets in order to survive. So my conscience bothers me for that. So let's just shut down my conscience because it just yaps in my ear, but I can't do anything about it because I got to survive. That's my only option, is to do those things that my conscience is upset about. So now I shut down my conscience. So you're shutting, and then you go, I don't think my uncle there is a safe person. My gut says they're not safe, but mom says, oh yeah, go listen to your uncle, sit on his knees, spend time with your uncle. And so everybody in my life is saying, ignore your gut, and forcing me to do certain things. But then I get hurt. But if I listen to my gut, then I get punished for listening to my gut and not going along with what the family wants. So let's shut down my gut. So soul murder is that gradual process of shutting down the very systems that make us human, that enable us to be healthy. But I can't use those systems because they get me in trouble. They get me punished by the people in my life who are over me in authority. So I now have to start shutting down. So another way to look at it, Brad, would be, what the mindset is if I shut these things down, these are the things that make me weak and that get me rejected. By shutting them down, I become stronger. So if I don't have weak emotions, then I'm strong because I don't show emotions. I just live out of my head. If I don't care about anybody, I'm tough. I'm strong. And so I think it's making me stronger, but what I don't realize, it's making me less human because I'm shutting down the parts of humanity that enable me to connect, to have intimate relationships, that be a real person that can make a true impact. So you redefine strength to be, you never show emotion, you never care about anything, and you end up with this wrong definition of strength. And that's easy sometimes for men to do because, yeah, that's the way men are, and men are going to be tough, etc. But you're really becoming less and less human. And so what ends up for many people is, I can't resolve my emotions, so shut them down. I can't resolve my conscience, so shut them down. I can't resolve my gut, what it's telling me, so shut it down. So I'm just going to live in my head, bottom line. I'm going to shut everything else down and become this very cerebral, academic, logical person who just thinks their way through life. And I'm not going to feel, I'm not going to connect to people. Relationships don't matter. Emotions don't matter. All of that. And that then becomes what you twist survival into, this is making me great. This is making me a somebody, when really you're becoming less and less of a true human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim, this weakness strength dichotomy is reminding me of a refrain from one of these sort of dangerous people who I knew, and it was how he seemed to really divide the world and justify a lot of his actions. I wonder, Tim, with soul murder, it sounds a bit like developing a shadow self. What do you think are
Oh, and
connections, differences?
yeah, very much what happens. So, if I can back up and put it in this context, if you look at a child coming into the world, so their driving need is, I need to connect because I can't meet any of my own needs. So the only way my needs are going to get met and I'm going to be able to live is if I connect to somebody that can take care of me. So they're driven to connect to their parents. But part of that also is, I'm going to be me. I'm going to be authentic. So authenticity and connection become these two driving needs. But what happens for many children with complex trauma is, if they're authentic, they're told, you're too emotional, you're too sensitive, you cry too much, you get angry, we don't like that. So authenticity doesn't lead to connection. Authenticity leads to rejection. So in their brain, the new recipe for healthy, intimate relationships is not authenticity and connection. It's, don't be authentic if you want to connect. So I got to hate parts of myself and shut down parts of myself, which, they're still me, but they're now in the shadows. I don't like them. I don't want them. And the danger is to think that they're not affecting me, that I somehow got rid of them. But what you don't realize is, they're still in you. They're still part of you. They're still part of your subconscious brain. And they often are still controlling your behavior. And they can get triggered, and then you can go off and they're going to control your behavior. So that shadow self is a part now that is kind of, you think is buried and is not significant, but it becomes this controlling force that can get triggered and then take over. So yeah, the very much connected.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like maybe a shadow self is more something on a spectrum. Maybe we all have a bit of a shadow and we work on it. And soul murder sounds more binary. It's murder. It's dead or alive. The soul is on or off. Something like that.
Yeah. So another way to look at it is, what happens for many kids in complex trauma is, so being a sensitive, let's say an introvert, gets me rejection. People look down on me for that. If I'm too much into artsy stuff, I get looked down on that for that. So I can't be me. So I have to create a false persona. Um, And so that's what I'm going to present to the world is this is me. Hopefully you'll like it. You'll respect it. So I'll become a people pleaser. I'll become a perfectionist. I'll become a hard worker. All of these different things that I tried to build in. I'll become this outgoing extrovert, life of the party, funny. And so I create this false persona that I think is the real me, but it's a fake. It's not me, but it's what I think everybody else wants. So I'm going to give it to them. And so the real me actually becomes this shadow me, this other side of me. But there's often, so I got to add another piece here, Brad, is what happens in complex trauma is a child comes into the world with really healthy instincts of loving. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to give. I'm going to care for people. I'm going to respect people, treat them as equals. That's built into a child. But that then it gets judged and hurt. And so to survive, I got to lie. I got to manipulate. I got to wear masks. I got to be fake. I got to learn to people please, control, fawn. I got to be all these other things. So my adaptations to survive, so I don't get hurt anymore, so I get respect, so I get earn love. All of these adaptations look like they're working. So now I'm lying and manipulating. I don't trust people. I'm a people pleaser. I'm a control freak. All of those seem to be creating success and getting me respect and validation. But 20, 30 years later, all of a sudden, all my intimate relationships are destroyed by I don't trust, I don't connect, I control, I manipulate. So the very things I did to adapt to survive really are maladaptations that come out in later life. But all of those adaptations become my shadow self. They become dark forces in my life now, because now in adult life, as soon as I'm in a situation where my needs aren't met, where does my brain go to? Let's go to manipulating people. Let's go to be a control freak in this situation. That's the only way I think I can be guaranteed my needs will be met. Because I'm afraid to trust love now, because that never worked. I got to trust these dark forces as the only way to get my needs met. So for some, that dark side or the shadow self has that very dark component to it. And it's made up of all their maladaptations that they had to do to survive.
Mm-hmm. And you said that the child comes into the world with these instincts. I do want to talk about genetics and how we're born. But before we get there, I have a follow-up question on soul murder from one of our listeners. Goes by the online name @don't4get2cultivate. So don't forget to cultivate. And they ask, at what point do they experience the soul murder? As a child or as adolescents?
It's a good question. I would be careful to try to make that too regimented black and white, because I think it's different for everybody. I think what's key for many people is it depends on the severity of the trauma. So you can get a child who was severely neglected or abused right from birth, and grew up with very angry, violent parents, or very depressed, disconnected parents, or very narcissistic, controlling type of parent, and the child was greatly abused physically, sexually. So they had to adapt severely very early on to survive. And so those children, they can quickly be spotted with kind of mental health disorders. So they're now destroying objects, abusing animals, lighting fires, arsonists, all those things. They're just venting their pain. They become bullies at school. That is early signs that soul murder is happening, because they don't have a conscience. They don't care. They don't care about how they're hurting others. They're just venting their pain and their anger. So that can happen in some at a young age if it's very severe trauma. Others, you don't see the adaptations still in their teens, or all of a sudden they don't feel like they fit in, because what happened in their trauma is they felt the reason they were being neglected and abused was because they weren't good enough. must be something wrong with them. The reason they couldn't connect is something wrong with them. So they never felt like they fit in at home. So now they try to fit in with their friends, but they can't be authentic. So they start doing what the group wants, and the peer pressure begins to take hold. So now they're going to smoke with their friends, even though they don't feel good about smoking, but that's what you got to do to fit in. And so you start to see the adaptations in the teens, whereas other kids adapted by becoming straight A student, the perfect child, the high achiever in sports, and all kinds of different things. And everybody adored them and looked up to them as this wonderful kid. And you don't see their problems with their adaptations till they get married and have kids. And all of a sudden they're perfectionists, their drivenness, their people pleasing. They please everybody but their own family. They got to make sure everybody else is happy, but their kids suffer, their spouse suffers. So in some cases, you see the adaptations, the toll of it within a couple of years. Others, it could be 20, 30 years. It really depends on kind of the severity of the trauma and what adaptations they found necessary to survive.
Yeah, Tim, when you speak about roles, you have so much insight about the family systems around this sort of thing. And I want to get to that too. There's so much here. But let's go back to how the child comes into the world. You said something like they come in with instincts, positive instincts. What do you make of genes sort of a bent towards a certain personality that might be more manipulative?
Yeah. So I think all of us, it's again, nurture versus nature. So let me give you an example. I looked at, this is going back 15, 20 years. My dad dug out a picture, or my mom dug out a picture, and it had my grandpa, my dad, my brother, and his son sitting on a couch. So 4 generations of Fletcher sitting on a couch. And it just stood out like a sore thumb. All had the identical posture. They all had that bit of a slouch as they're sitting on the couch. So I asked myself, is that genetic, or did my dad just pick up from watching his dad almost by osmosis? You kind of just mirror much of what your parents do without even realizing it. And so you kind of sit like your dad and mirror that, and then it just gets passed on for generations. And so I think that's where there's this gray area of, I don't want to try to divide it too distinctly, because I think I'm not sure. There's probably some genetic stuff there, but there's an awful lot of children just pick up parents' attitudes, body language, posture. Nobody taught them. It's not genetic. It's just the effect of role models, the effect of influence that parents have in a child. So what we know is definitely there's a genetic thing that influences personality, body features, all kinds of how your brain works, etc. Then there's an epigenetic element, which is epigenetics are the things over your genes that turn on certain genes. And what we know is that trauma can affect the epigenetics, so it only turns on certain genes. And so you can get then generational characteristics that come out of trauma that are turned on, that are around food, where kind of fat is stored in the body, all of those different things. But I think, so there's genes, there's personality, but then I think there's kind of that, again, hard to define, that soul thing that I think a child comes in with an open heart. A child comes in wanting love, giving love. There's an innocence there. That's part of every child. And so that bent to manipulation, it's in all of us, I think. We all can go there to survive. So that the fact that a child goes there, to me, is, I don't think they just go there automatically. They go there because something in them was afraid their needs weren't going to get met if they didn't go there. There was a survival issue. And again, that's so tricky. So if I can back up, Brad, and say this to people. When we talk about trauma, I think a lot of people still are using the original definition of trauma, which is something horrific happening, a one-time out of the normal type of event, like a car accident, a rape, whatever. And they go, that's never happened to me, so I don't have trauma. And so this Tim guy's talking about trauma, and I don't get it because I don't have trauma. And what we realize is that simple trauma, we call it that horrific big T trauma, is a reality, but it's a small piece of the pie, of the trauma pie. The bigger part of the pie is what we know as little t trauma and complex trauma. And complex trauma is that ongoing sense of danger, and little t trauma is neglect trauma. So big T trauma is something bad happened to you. Little t trauma is something good that should have happened to you but didn't, because parents were too busy. Parents had their own problems. So your needs weren't met. You weren't nurtured when you were in pain. Nobody gave you the tools to handle certain issues. That's trauma. That makes you feel alone. That makes you feel that you don't matter. That makes you feel that your needs aren't going to be met, that you can't connect, that you can't be authentic. That is significant trauma. And over 80% of people have that. But what people need to realize is that's subtle. Because you go, well, nothing bad happened to me. I had a pretty good home where all my physical needs were met. We had a lot of fun together. Yes, but you could have had a couple emotional needs that weren't met. You weren't allowed to be totally authentic. You weren't able to connect on every topic with your parents. There were certain taboo topics that you just couldn't bring up. And all of a sudden you felt alone. You felt unsafe. That is trauma. That is significant. But then it goes further than that. And understanding the vagus nerve, we know that the vagus nerve receives danger through 3 different means. So it uses perception, which is our 5 senses. And so most people, when they think of trauma, only think of perception. If I could see it, feel it, experience it, then it's trauma. But then there's interoception, which is the nerves are checking all of your internal organs. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Am I feeling sick, nauseous? All of that. Do I have an itch? That's all of those things. And then there's neuroception. And neuroceptions is your vibe system. And what they've understood from that is even within a womb, a child through neuroception is picking up their mom's stress level, picking up their mom's emotional world. And if their mom is stressed out and is constantly angry or upset, they're not feeling safe. And so you can have a child in a home that looks great on the outside, all their physical needs are met, but they're sensing dad is always angry. Now, dad never explodes. They just sense the vibe. Mom is always negative and down. I don't feel safe. And everybody goes, but you got a wonderful home. But the child is picking up the deep internal world of their parents and not feeling safe. And so when you look at that, then all of a sudden you realize that, wow, when people stop and think about that, they go, yeah, I had a few of those things in my life where I'm picking up that dad's got a lot of stress, dad's very irritable, and all of a sudden I'm walking on eggshells as a kid, and I kind of learn how to do that, and I develop a radar where I can pick up dad's mood and know whether it's safe to play in the living room today or whether I should go play somewhere else because dad's going to be impatient with me today. That is kind of what is happening inside of a child as they're going through all of this stuff. And so it's just important for people to really understand that this whole trauma thing is way broader than horrific stuff. And that over 80% of people have this little t complex trauma component that sends them into all of these adaptations that I talk about. That if dad's full of stress and dad's angry, then must be my fault. I must need to change in order to fix dad, in order for him to not be mad at me. And that sends them down the same path as if they had some horrific stuff happening.
Mm-hmm. Tim, you're talking about taking on these roles and things in the family, becoming the straight A student or maybe the manipulative behavior. What's happening in the child who rebels and becomes the family scapegoat?
A couple of different possibilities with that. So sometimes what happens is you have a child, let's say, that becomes the hero child. That's the straight A student. You have another child that's the comedy, funny kid. And so what people need to understand is they're developing those roles to try to solve both the family problems, the tension, the anger in the family, but also to try to get their needs met, to try to get respected and loved. So they feel they got to earn love. They're not going to get it by being authentic. So I will be what mom and dad want me to be, what will get me validation, what will get me their approval. And that will make mom and dad happier. That'll fix some of the family tension. And so they develop that. And then some kids go to, I will become invisible, or I'll become the lost child, where I'm going to never have needs. I'm never going to put myself out there. I'll kind of hang out in my room, never be a bother, never be a burden. And that will make family life better. And then I'll never get hurt. What's important for people to understand is all of those three roles, the kids aren't able to be authentic and the kids aren't being honest about what's really going on in the family. They're saying it's their fault instead of saying dad's a narcissist, mom's whatever. And so there's an intellectual dishonesty that's happening and a denial of the real issues that is happening. And they're trying to make it something they can fix. The scapegoat is the child that says, no, this family's screwed up and I am going to be authentic. I'm not going to be what they want me to be and conform to mom and dad because mom and dad are hurting me. I don't trust mom and dad. And so they are the only one determined to be honest about the family and about being authentic. And so the whole if you look at everybody within the family with the first three scenarios, they go, this is a wonderful family. Must be wonderful parents. You got a hero child. You got a comedian. You got this child that never makes demands, is such a sweet child. What a perfect little family. But then you got this fourth kid. Man, he's the reason the family is struggling. So now he's a scapegoat. He's not just the problem. He's now the scapegoat for all of the family problems are now his fault. If he was just a better kid, then we'd have a wonderful family. So that's scenario one. Scenario two is sometimes, especially a narcissistic parent, will kind of groom kids to fulfill certain roles. So they'll have their princess daughter that they want to be the hero child and the straight A student. And they'll have their son that they want to be the athlete and the life of the party, the funny person. But they will have the scapegoat, the kid they don't really like, they don't connect to very well, that kind of annoys them. It's too much like their mother, too much like whatever. And so they just take out their anger on that child and they kind of blame that child for all the problems of the family. And so it's important that a narcissist always needs somebody to blame. And within a family system, they find a child that they can blame for their anger, their discontent, the struggles that are obvious are happening in the family. They find a convenient child to blame.
Mm-hmm. And Tim, the scapegoat child also seems it's serving a purpose, like a scapegoat, literally. Could it be that some children develop into the scapegoat as a way to try to fix things? They kind of say, I'll take the burden.
Some do. So if I could just connect it to kind of the child, then part of what happens with the scapegoat is they're rebelling against conforming to this unhealthy family dynamic. So they're saying, this is not love. This is not connection. This is not a happy family. I'm rebelling against it. And so there's this rebellious element that becomes part of that scapegoat child is, I'm not going to conform like my sister and brother did and try to please dad all the time. So that rebellious piece, what then can happen with that is often there's another element with it, and that's a parent that then tries to get the kids to conform. They try to control everything about the kids. So what I like people to realize is if you look at a child when they're brand new baby, they are 100% dependent on their parents, so their parents have 100% control. But by the time the child's 20, the parents are transferring control to that child to make more and more decisions to become autonomous. So that by the time the child's 20, they kind of have 100% control of their own life and the parents step back. But in some complex trauma, especially with narcissists, where image is everything and everybody's got to make me look good, is they try to control the child, or you get a very fearful mother that's afraid the child's going to make bad decisions. So they try to kind of smother mother, helicopter mother to make sure the child doesn't ever make a bad decision. So there's a control factor. So the child's not allowed to grow up into natural autonomy. And so the only way the child can get a bit of space to start making decisions and being authentic is to rebel. But what then happens with that is the parents go, oh, this is a rebellious child. We got to tighten control on them and make it and get them to conform. And then the child rebels even more to try to get space. And pretty soon what happens is, doesn't matter what mom or dad does or says, they just do the opposite. They're so angry and defiant now towards that control that they just have now oppositional defiance disorder, and they're just going to do that. So that becomes an issue. Okay, so back to your question. I would put what happens for some children is they're put in a position of being the parent to their parents. So dad acts like a victim, blames everybody's angry, blames everybody for their angry. So the kid learns, I'm responsible to take care of dad's emotions. I'm responsible to meet dad's needs. I got to be the grown up around here because my parents and then mom's kind of enabling and not fulfilling, kind of standing up to dad and all of that. So I got to take care of my siblings because mom and dad are too busy. I got to be the adult. So they're forced to grow up quickly, and there's underneath that there's kind of an anger but a compliance that's in the same body. So the compliance, the responsible part, is what is seen often until in the teens. And then in the teens it's like, you know what, screw this, I'm done with that. It's time for me to live a little, and that anger and that rebellion comes out, and then they get labeled the problem child. They then get scapegoated because, see, my kid went wild in his teens. That's the reason we're now stressed out and struggling. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but it's a long kind of answer that I hope got there.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we're talking about all this and changing and development things, you talk about an idea of reparenting oneself. So maybe you come to a point in life where you recognize that this happened and now you're an adult. We've also talked a little bit about the idea of role models. What is reparenting? How is it done?
Yeah, so it's, to me, such an important concept for people to understand. So in complex trauma, you were given some healthy tools from your biological parents, but you were also given unhealthy tools. So a lot of your emotional needs weren't met. You weren't shown how to handle different emotions, how to handle different problems, how to handle all kinds of situations. They weren't there to teach you. They weren't there to support you. And so when you get into adult life, you've got only a toolbox that's kind of a mishmash of healthy and unhealthy. And so the reality becomes, you can't go back to your biological parents and say, teach me, because they still are operating off of that mixed bag of tools. You now have to parent yourself. And that's a huge, to me, understanding for what recovery looks like for most people coming out of trauma. It's your learning how to meet your needs that your parents didn't meet. It's learning tools to cope, to have relationships, to handle problems that you weren't taught. It's getting rid of old tools that you naturally want to go to and learning new tools that feel awkward and uncomfortable and learning how to use them until they become comfortable. And so most of us in the early days, we need a mentor or a surrogate parent to kind of role model for us what this looks like, because there's an element of reparenting that you can get from textbooks, from learning, but there's an element that you can only get experientially by watching somebody in that nuanced area of how to handle different situations, and they can help co-regulate some of your emotional dysregulation. So reparenting to me is a huge thing. So that's part one. Part two of that to me is significant. We talked about soul murder. And another way to understand that is, so that shadow self often is the part of you that you rejected, you didn't like. So I didn't like that I'm an introvert. I didn't like that I'm so sensitive. I didn't like that I cry so easily. So it's like I want to stuff that part of me into a closet, lock it, throw away the key. I hate that part of me. That causes me to be rejected. And so part of healing is realizing I got to go back to that part of me that was left behind. And I got to learn to love that part, accept that part, nurture that part, let that part know it has just as much value as the other parts of me. And I have to parent kind of that rejected inner child or exile that I had because of my trauma, and try to integrate that into all of me so I become a complete person again. So there's kind of that two aspects of reparenting, but both are vital to understand.
Yeah, so we have these two aspects. We have sort of this outward role models, examples, and this inward sort of looking back at oneself. Let's talk about a role model. How do we pick a good one? And I'm especially thoughtful about this one because the most dangerous narcissistic person I've ever known would position himself with everyone
Exactly.
as a role model, a mentor, a teacher, and that was how he got leverage on people who were vulnerable and looking for that. So how do we find a good one?
Exactly. And this, to me, is one of the most crucial but difficult questions to answer for people. So the bottom line is good role models are safe people. But how do you define safe people? And it's people who, and this is where it gets tricky, is now I have to listen to my gut. I can't just look at the externals, because a narcissist, they can replicate externals and be a total fraud, but they can look so caring, so genuine. They're grooming you, they're love bombing you, they're doing all the things that make them look healthy, but your gut says something's off here. And so that's where part one, you got to begin to listen to your gut to go, does this feel safe? Do I sense anger, stress, dishonesty? What am I picking up there? And I think if you go back to a child can go into a room with two people it doesn't know, and it can run into the arms of one person and run away from the other person. And you go, why? Why does a child know that? Because a child's gut is saying that person's not safe and this person's safe. And even a dog picks that up. They just have this amazing neuroception. So one of the things that is part of soul murders, we had to shut down our gut, or neuroception. And it's kind of bringing it back to life and learning to listen to it again. That is so important. So what I want people to realize is, what then is my neuroception picking up on? So it's going to be, I only am going to know this over the long term. I'm not going to know this over the short term, because a narcissist can create short term looking good, but they can't create long term looking good. And so I got to be willing to kind of watch over a period of time. How do they treat other people? Do they treat with respect? Are they honest in all situations? Do they allow all kinds of emotions? Are they trying to fit me into a box that suits them? Are they letting me be authentic? Are they letting me explore? So all kinds of different characteristics that I am looking for to see whether this person is safe for me to connect to. And the gut is a key thing, but I'm also looking for kind of those red flag things. Are they trying to manipulate me? Do they allow honest expression? Are they trying to control me, etc.? So we've done a whole series on it because it's such a big but intricate topic for people, and such an important topic for them to really think through. Because like you said, narcissists are the greatest at fooling people, if we don't know kind of what to look for.
So Tim, it sounds like to be able to have that neuroception, as you said, that intuition about who is a good role model, we first need to be more in touch with those other things that we might have shut off. So is it the individual work that needs to come first to kind of guide looking out, finding the role models, or do they work in tandem?
Yeah, and I think they work in tandem. They come in different orders for different people.
Okay.
It really depends on the person. But I think there has to be internal work and then connection to safe people work. So let me just expand on the internal work because it sounds simpler than it is.
Yeah.
I think what is important to understand is when a child goes through complex trauma, so their needs aren't being met or they're being abused, and they can't connect to anybody, so they're going through all of that, they feel very much alone. They feel disconnected from everybody. What then happens in that child is they conclude it's my fault. The reason I'm not connecting is I must be bad. I must not be lovable. I must not be valuable. So that then leads to, I don't even want to connect with me. So they then go into some of their adaptations is, I don't want to feel my emotions. I don't want to live in my own skin. So now I don't like sitting quietly by myself with nothing to do, because then I'd have to think and feel and live with myself. And that's the last place I want to be. So what happens is I want to be anywhere but present in the present. I want to be dissociated from the present. So I'm going to stay busy all the time, video games all the time, with my friends all the time, constantly going, because I don't want to be with me. I don't want to be present to me. And so you abandon yourself is what I'm getting at. So you first felt abandoned by others. Now you abandon yourself. So much of the key beginning work for people in recovery is connecting to self again. It's learning to listen to yourself, spend time with yourself, learn to identify your different needs, learn how to meet your needs. It doesn't matter if you feel like it or not. You begin doing it because you know it's right until you start to feel like doing it. And what the other thing that happens for many people out of complex trauma is they develop a very strong inner critic. So they always felt they were never good enough, that they were always being judged. And if they were authentic, they were being punished. They were being told they were wrong. And so they hear all of this criticism, this negative talk, being compared to others. And a lot of complex trauma families grew up with kind of shame-based parenting. So if a child fails, you then punish them really hard. You shame them as a way to motivate them to really want to change. That might work short term, but if you get constantly negative, put down, harsh, cruel, critical treatment, pretty soon you lose motivation to change, because it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't seem to improve the situation. But what you don't realize is that you're adopting all of those voices in your head and that belief system. And so now when you fail, you think the last thing I should do is be compassionate to myself. I need to be hard on myself. I need to beat myself up. I need to punish myself. And you just start all of the voices. You're a loser. You can't do anything right. And then you are just so hard on yourself. And so that's part of all of this disconnecting from self, is I now have this very negative, harsh, cruel non-compassionate view to myself. And so connecting to yourself is not just connecting, it's connecting with compassion. It's learning self-empathy. And that's a massive milestone for people to really shift internally, to learn to accept themselves, be kind to themselves, nurture themselves, meet their needs. And then another piece, if I can just briefly add it, if you have a narcissist parent, they want their needs met and they want the kids to give up their own needs in order to meet the parents' needs. And so the child begins to feel, and they are often were told, that if they have a need, they're being selfish. And so they develop this mindset that if I have a need, I'm being selfish. And so now to connect with yourself, to learn to meet your needs, all the voices come back. You're being selfish. You're not being loving. And you have to reprogram a lot of bad messaging that you got as a child about very healthy desires that you were told were actually bad when they were actually very healthy. So there's a lot, again, there, but I hope that kind of answers it.
Yeah, there's so much there. And you mentioned the development of the self-empathy as sort of a milestone. Are there other big milestones? What does the reparenting journey look like? How do we know when we're done?
Yeah, very good questions. I think the key, so reconnecting with self. So again, let me back up and come at this from a couple of different angles. When a child's in danger, their first instinct is fight or flight. So the brain releases cortisol, adrenaline to give you the energy to fight or flight. But a child, if they're too little to fight or flight, the brain goes, okay, that's not working. So let's go to a different response to survive. And they go then to releasing opioids into the blood that enables them to freeze or dissociate. So I can't escape to an external world, so I'll escape to an internal world. And the opioids will cover any pain if I get abused or hurt. So I can now go to a fantasy world. I can now dissociate. I can now be on a beach in the Bahamas and not even realize that I'm being sexually abused, whatever. So the brain enables you to do that. And then the brain goes, but I still need these people who are hurting me to meet my needs. So now I have to learn. The fourth one is to fawn. I have to learn to people please. I have to learn to be more attuned to their needs than my own needs. I have to learn to take care of others, sacrifice my needs, and meet their needs if I'm going to be happy, if I'm going to earn love. So a child is learning to do all of those things in order to survive. And that becomes such a big part of what they're doing. Okay, so just remind me of the question again, because I just forgot.
Yeah, the journey of reparenting, the milestones, maybe a finish line.
Yeah, so then what is happening with all of that is they're shutting stuff down, but then they're being hurt. So a child that is being hurt and their needs aren't being met, their initial response is to cry. A baby, if they're hungry, if they're hurt, they cry. And so they become emotionally dysregulated. But what happens is a child has no tools to regulate their own emotions. They need a co-regulator. So mom or dad or a caregiver come in, hopefully who's regulated themselves. They comfort the child. They meet the child's needs. They connect to the child. And then the child regulates those emotions. They calm down because the problem is resolved. What happens in complex trauma is the child doesn't get that emotional regulation. So they basically go to kind of two options. Number one is they just repress their emotions. I'm not going to feel, I'm not going to express, I'm never going to get angry, I'm never going to be sad. And they shut their emotions down, or they just become quickly dysregulated. So somebody disrespects them, somebody makes them feel stupid, they explode. Like they just can't regulate emotions. So anger starts coming out all the time, fear, panic, depression, all kinds of things. They just can't regulate their emotions. What happens for many people then is they come into recovery and they start remembering all of this childhood stuff. and it's triggering pain, and they get dysregulated. They get into an intimate relationship and their partner appears to disrespect them one day. He doesn't really, but they re-disrespect it. Now they're dysregulated. And they begin to realize they do a ton of damage when they're dysregulated. When they're not dysregulated, they're not doing much damage, if any. But once they're dysregulated, that's where the damage happens. Because then they lash out. Then they go into fight mode or flight mode. And so a key milestone early on is learning to regulate emotions. Learning when I get dysregulated, how do I get myself grounded, calm down, back into my thinking? One of the things that happens when you're dysregulated is you go into the limbic part of your brain, the emotional part of your brain, the survival part of your brain, and that is very distorted. You think you're seeing things accurately, but you're not really. You think you're thinking the truth, but you're actually going back to lies. And so part of being regulated is you get back to your cortex where you can think clearly again, think accurately, think based on truth and facts, not based on how I'm feeling. So that to me becomes a key thing. The next one is,
Tim, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Could we refine something on that just a little?
Yeah.
How do we know when we are regulating rather than getting back into that sort of shutting down pattern?
Excellent question. So in the shutting down pattern, I don't allow myself to feel or express. I deny that I'm feeling certain things. In the regulating, I'm admitting I'm feeling anger, but then I give myself permission to feel what's underneath the anger, to explore what's underneath the anger. In the repressed, I'm not feeling anger. So what's happening in the regulation is I'm being honest, I'm admitting it, I'm exploring it, I'm allowing myself to learn how to express it appropriately. And that is just a massive difference for people, but it's a key distinction.
Thank you for that nuance. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So to me, after you learn to regulate your emotions, then the next key thing for people, and this now gets into moving from just working on yourself in isolation, is I have to learn to connect again. I can't make this journey totally alone. I got to find some safe people who help me in this reparenting process. So connection to me is that key need that never goes away. It's not just in an infant. All of life gains meaning when we find healthy connection. But for people that grew up where every time they tried to connect, they got hurt, they just conclude that connection is unnecessary or bad. And I just need to learn to soldier on, to be self-sufficient. Who needs people? I can do this in isolation, and I'll just read books and learn tools and be Mr. Academic, and I'll get this all figured out. And you can do a ton of healing, but you'll only get so far, and you won't find the fulfillment that you're really looking for. You have to find that connection. And that to me is absolutely essential. But what happens for people is as soon as I learn, let's say I find somebody and they are, I think, quite safe. So I'm going to risk a little bit of connection with them. I'm going to open up. I'm going to trust them a little. That triggers fear. They're going to let me down. The same old history is going to repeat itself here. And I want to then sabotage that because I'm afraid it's going to go down the same road as my past has done. And so to trust this new way triggers fear. And so I got to walk through fear to get to healthy is what I want people to see. And there's an element of just, you got to walk through fear after fear in the early days of recovery, because every time you go to do something healthy, it triggers a fear that this is going to end up in the old hurt category. So that connecting to me is just absolutely essential. So if I can just back up again. When a child couldn't connect to people because they weren't safe, they kept hurting them, that desire didn't go away. So what children learn to do is to connect in two different ways, either to things or activities. So I'll connect to video games. They give me the feelings of connection. I'll connect in a gang because it's superficial, it's fake, but it makes me feel like I'm part of a family. Or I'll go into sports or into the bar and everybody's just light and fluffy and funny and we all feel close, but there's no depth. There's no true authenticity. So you get fake connection, like kind of superficial, or you get connection to activities or possessions. And so I can connect to food. I connect to sex. I connect to pornography. Anything that gives the same chemicals in my brain as true connection does, but it's not true connection. So all of those things actually set people up for addiction because they don't truly satisfy. They give momentary pleasure, but then because there's not true connection, there's an emptiness that follows. And then when people find drugs and alcohol, they go, oh, this is the best chemical mix yet that feels like connection. So addiction is really all about connection. And so what people begin to realize is I've connected to all kinds of activities and things and food and all of these different things. I got to learn to find kind of healthy connection and intimacy. And you don't do that overnight. It's a journey. It's a slow process, but it's such a key major milestone. And once you begin to do it, it leads to experience a joy that you've never experienced before in your life because you never had connection. And it just opens up this whole new world. So another way to say that is in complex trauma, your needs weren't met consistently, or all your needs weren't met. So part of what you learn in the early days of recovery is you have to learn to meet your own needs, your emotional needs, your relational needs, your physical needs, your intellectual needs, spiritual needs. All of those, I have to learn how to take care of myself. But recovery isn't just about becoming self-absorbed, though it feels like it in the beginning days because I got to learn to reparent myself and do all of that. So eventually what I'm learning is healthy loving myself. But eventually I begin to realize I have to also learn to love others. There's got to be a blend between loving myself and loving others that makes life complete and full. And part of loving others is I connect first, but then I learn to care for others as well. So again, those are just key milestones for people in this journey.
Mm-hmm. And Tim, in the connecting to others, you mentioned fear and a risk of self-sabotage. How do we recognize or prevent self-sabotage?
Well, I think it's important to realize that people can self-sabotage without even realizing it, and they can do it over all kinds of different things. So just let me give you an example. So a lot of children in complex trauma who her needs weren't being met, their brain basically went to 50 different options as to how I could get my needs met and get dad to love me. So I'll get better marks in school. I'll get interested in a sport that dad likes. I will whatever. And so I will bring dad the paper in the morning and his coffee, and I'll be the perfect little child. So the child does that, and immediately they get their hopes up that dad's now going to love me. This option's going to work. And they do it, and dad is mean. Their hopes dash, and they get hurt. So two negative things happen now. Not only do they get hurt again, but their hopes got dashed. But their brain goes, not a problem. There's option B here. Let's go to option B. I will do this. Their hopes get up again that this is going to work this time, and then it doesn't. They get hurt, and their hopes get dashed. A child will do that option after option. There's got to be something I can do. Let me just think about it. I got to come up with another option. It's all my fault. And they don't realize it's dad's issue. It's all on them. And they just think there's an option. They keep getting their hopes up, and then they get dashed. Usually around 10 to 13, they get to a point where they go, I've run out of options. I don't care anymore. I'm never going to get this need met. I'm not going to hope again. Because every time I get my hopes up, it hurts more to get my hopes dashed than the actual hurt itself of what the person did to me. So play that forward 20 years. They get they meet somebody healthy and they get their job back. They starting in a relationship and things are starting to look good in their life. And they go, I'm starting to hope that I'm going to have a good life. And their brain goes, we don't hope. Because every time you've hoped, you've got hurt. So without even realizing, they sabotage their job, they sabotage the relationship, they sabotage any good thing that starts to happen in their life because they're afraid of getting their hope up. So they want to hope, but they're afraid to actually hope. So that's just kind of one area, and it goes into all kinds of different areas. So if you look at a person that, let me give you another area. So let's say a girl was neglected, but she's just a beautiful girl. And she only got then validated for her body. And so she's told, wow, you just gorgeous, you're a number, you're a 10, etc. So her only sense of value comes from her body. She doesn't feel she has any value otherwise. So she goes into the teen years, all the boys give her attention and validate her. And she goes, that proves it. My body's what gives me value. And she goes on in life. And then she gets to a point where she realizes all the attention I'm getting from guys, though, is sexual. They don't care about me. They just care about my body. Do I have any value beyond that? And she gets into recovery and she begins to learn, I do have value. My body's not what gives me my main value. And so she goes, okay, I'm not going to flirt anymore and use all those tricks that I've used to flaunt my body. I am not going to do any of that. No guy pays her attention for 2 weeks. And she panics. And all of a sudden, I better go back to my body. I better sabotage my recovery because doing this is the only way I'm going to get any sense of value again. So I could go on with hundreds of different examples of how that all works out. But the sabotage thing is so subtle, but it is just deadly for people. And so most people don't realize their sabotage issues until they've gone through it once, and then they go, oh, I just sabotaged that. And then they stop and figure out, why did I sabotage it? What was triggered? Explore that. And then that prepares them for the next time they encounter that situation where they're more on the ball and they're able to spot, okay, here's an instinct that I can feel kicking in. That's basically a fear that something bad's going to happen that makes me want to sabotage.
Mm-hmm. And how does that first time catching it work? Is that something that you find people have success with by journaling, therapy, talking to friends?
Very much all of those. But still, for some people, they only learn it by experiencing it. So let's say they start entering a relationship again. It's going really well and it's a really good person, but then they just start pulling away. They start sabotaging it. And then afterward, when they're kind of away from it, they start reflecting and they go, what's going on here? That was a wonderful person. I still see them regularly. And then they can start to go, wow, I just destroyed something that had great potential for good. So yeah, often when you're in the middle of it and others try to point it out to you, you sometimes don't hear them. You got to go through the pain of doing it to actually stop and pay attention.
Yeah. Tim, we've briefly touched on shame, and something I heard you say, shame works on your limbic brain. So what is shame? What is that limbic brain element?
Yeah, so this to me is such an important topic. So shame, it's really important for people to understand there's two elements to shame. So most of us, when we think of shame as an emotion. So I feel shame. I just did something. I feel shamed. Or your parents said you should be ashamed of yourself. Oh, the shame you brought on the family. You should be ashamed of yourself. So shame, definitely there's an emotion that's part of the limbic brain. That's where the emotions are experienced. But what people need to understand is that shame actually, what caused the emotion is deeper, and that's a belief. And the belief So shame is first and foremost a belief about my identity, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not valuable just as I am authentic self, that I'm not lovable, that somehow I'm less than others. So that core belief comes out of complex trauma. So why am I neglected? I must not be lovable. I must not be good enough. So a child comes into the world naturally in a healthy family with a very positive self-identity. Complex trauma twists that 180 degrees and makes it into this negative self-identity. That's a core belief that's based on lies that it's my fault, I'm not good enough, all of those things. So that core belief now, so if I'm with somebody else and all of a sudden they're talking to somebody else and I'm feeling they don't like me anymore, or I go to share with them a little bit and they give me some feedback that sounds a little bit like criticism, like they're judging me. They don't like me. They're about to reject me. What's that about? That's about that shame belief deep down, but it brought the feelings of shame. And so what people, I think, have to understand is that today in adult life, if like I remember coming home from work once and my wife was just itching to talk to me about her day. And there's some mail on the table and I picked up the mail. And immediately she went to, he doesn't think I'm worth listening to. And it was my bad. I should have given her my full attention and be present, but I wasn't. But part of it was her shame got triggered because she never felt heard as a kid. She never felt anybody truly listened and valued what she had to say. And so by me picking up the mail, that triggered that. So that goes to the limbic brain, the emotion of shame now that I'm not good enough. I'm being rejected. I'm being thought of as stupid. I don't matter. All of that is happening in the limbic brain. But what people need to understand is there's all kinds of lies that come with that emotion. It's not true that my wife's not good enough, that my wife is stupid, that my wife is not seen. But that's what she was feeling and therefore thinking that came out of that. And so what I want people to realize is in dealing with shame, when that limbic brain gets triggered, go, what's the belief under it right now? Let's get down. Let's not just try to change the emotion. Let's figure out what I'm believing about myself and what lies are part of that. And let's get back to the cortex and go, is that really true about me? And let's replace it with the truth.
Mm-hmm. Tim, we talked about getting into the cortex. How does one get into that? It's sometimes it can seem that when a person's anxious or something, or we're in that sort of limbic state, it's overwhelming.
Oh, exactly. So what we know is when a person's stress system is activated, so through fear, through just stress, they feel overwhelmed. So anxiety, all of that is happening. The brain is releasing cortisol. And what the brain is basically doing is saying, let's start shutting down the cortex because we're going to shut down parts of the brain that we really don't need right now. And we're going to go back to the survival parts of the brain, the reptilian parts, the ancient parts of the brain that are responsible for survival. So we don't have time to think things through and weigh out options. We just got to survive. So the brain, they've done tremendous research on just as cortisol increases in the brain due to stress, a person's IQ gets lower and lower and lower because the cortex is being shut down and the brain is retreating to the limbic and the brainstem as its means of survival. And so a person can't get to their cortex unless they're in safety. That's the first thing people have to understand. As long as they're still in unsafe relationships, unsafe environment, the brain's going to automatically just keep you in your limbic brain and brainstem. And so you have to have safety. There's two parts to safety, though. So a child, if you look at a child who's kind of in a, let's say, a really rough neighborhood, okay? So they learn my neighborhood is dangerous, but my home is dangerous maybe as well, whatever. So the external environment is part of the danger. But let's say a person's in a dangerous neighborhood, but they've got wonderful, safe, loving parents they can connect to. And so now when they connect to the parents are like their rock, their fortress. Now they can go out in the neighborhood and the neighborhood doesn't bother them because their safety comes from connection, not from the external environment. And so it's so important for people to realize that creating this safety, which is essential, isn't just creating a safe environment, though that's part of it. It's finding safe people to connect to that then create a greater sense of safety for people.
In the heat of the moment, when that shame is triggered, anything tactical?
Yeah, so what I want people always to realize is that there's kind of different sets of tools that you have to learn. So there's basic tools about new habits to learn how to meet my own needs, new habits about how to connect people, respond to different painful situations, to hurts, all of that, all of wonderful tools. The hardest tools to learn are when I get triggered and then go from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond. And it's like this huge locomotive has left the station and I've got some reins on it trying to hold it back. And it's, how do you do that? And so in that nanosecond, if I don't find tools to keep those emotions from exploding, that's then when I say things I later regret. That's then when I do things I later regret. And so learning how to manage those emotions in that nanosecond are the hardest set of tools to learn. So when I started 22 years ago, I remember asking clients, how many of you have taken anger management courses? And everybody hand went up. And I go, how many of you found the tools helpful? And the answer that came back was, the tools that they taught us in anger management are helpful in a lot of situations, but there's certain times when the anger gets so intense and so quick that those tools don't work. And it's like, exactly. And then how many of you have got tools around kind of handling anxiety? Yep. Do they work? Yeah, in some situations, but there's times the fear gets so intense and so quick that those tools don't work. And so it's like there's a new set of tools for that super intense emotion that happens so quickly when a person with trauma is triggered. That is what you're talking about. And those are the hardest to learn. And so what I want people to realize is you don't learn them by reading a book and you don't learn them the first time. You learn it by reading books, learning, talking to people, getting therapy. But then usually the first time that emotion gets triggered, your brain goes back to the old tools. That's just the automatic. And then you fail. But after the failure, you go, what could I have done differently in that nanosecond, that time? And you learn one or two things. I could have gone for a walk. I could have left the room. I could have bit my tongue and just gone and did something till I calmed down. And you gradually begin to figure out little things that you could do to stop the explosion, stop all of that. It takes time, but it's something to figure out. So that's part one of that. But then the second thing is most people don't realize that when they get triggered, the past and the present meet. So it's not just something happening in the present that caused them to get angry. It's that what happened in the present connected to an unhealed wound from the past. But then what they don't realize is that their overall emotional state played a part in it as well. So They're super stressed out at work. They're super tired. They're on the edge of burnout. And so they don't have the emotional gasoline in their emotional gas tank to handle any extra frustration or trigger. They just lose it because they just are at the end of their rope because the rest of their life is maxed out. And so what I want people to realize is you got to deal with getting the reins on in the present, figuring out what it's triggered in the past, but then check out how's your stress level over the last week? How's your anxiety level? How's your guilt and shame level? How's like go through and just see like if the needle's in the red in all of those areas, you're going to be a walking time bomb. And the slightest little things are just going to make the triggers even worse. So it's just, I think why I'm saying all of this, Brad, is that so many people, when they come into recovery, they're looking for little magical quick fixes. Give me a couple quick tools. And it's like, no, there's the past, there's the broader picture of your present life, and then there's the crisis situation. All have to be factored in. You have to have tools for dealing with all three, being aware of all three, healing in all three. There's not a magic little quick fix for that.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad we're putting the nuance in this, especially with the shame thing. That's something that people often comment on these sort of discussions that I'm having is, something like they got away from a partner who was dangerous and manipulative and now they've been smeared. And so it's a struggle to go back out into the social environment that they used to or things. So to give people things to handle that sort of socialized shame, I think is so valuable.
Yeah. If I can just comment on that, because I think it's a wonderful example. So what I want people to realize is that so they're getting smeared, let's say on Facebook by their ex, and now they feel shame to go in public because people are talking behind their back. They're looking at them differently, all of those things. So shame is triggered in their limbic brain. But what I want people to realize is that every negative emotion pulls you to act in a certain way and to think in a certain way. So if you think of what does that person with shame feel like? I want to isolate. I don't want to be around people. I'm afraid to be around. So it creates greater fear. It pulls you towards isolation. Or I'm going to get angry. I'm going to lash back. I'm going to smear my ex. All of those things, it's pulling you in negative directions that might make you feel better temporarily, but they're only making the situation worse. And so that's your limbic brain looking for instant gratification, instant feeling better. It's not interested in long-term, is this a healthy thing that's going to work long-term? It just wants to instantly feel better. And so that's where you got to get out of your limbic brain into your cortex and go, I'm feeling this shame, which makes me want to pull away from people. No, that's the wrong response. Let's get to my cortex. What's a healthy response? I've done nothing wrong. I can go out and with my head held high and face people. And if they got a problem with me, that's their problem. That's not me. And so you begin to sort it out and figure out a plan of action that actually confronts the situation, goes out there and says, I am of value. I am nothing to be ashamed of. That's what somebody else is saying. People are going to talk. And if they keep talking, then I'm going to put up a boundary with them and not have them as a friend. But true friends are going to come and actually want to find out what's really going on. And so you get into your cortex to kind of get past that limbic shame pull.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Tim, while we're on this topic of shame, what do you think is the connection between shame and pathological narcissism?
I would say it's massive. It's the key piece. So to me, in understanding pathological narcissism, it's a person that, so two things. Number one, they've basically had to soul murder everything. So they've shut down their conscience, they've shut down empathy, they've shut down emotions, they've shut down connection, they've shut down trust. People are not to be loved, they're to be used. So that's number one. But secondly, there's a huge shame. So pathological narcissists to me come out of severe trauma where there's severe neglect or abuse, and that they develop this huge shame belief that they're basically a zero, a nothing. But then who wants to live with that? So they go to trying to compensate for that. So a hyper compensation, which is a pathological narcissist, I got to be better than everybody. I got to be smarter than everybody. I got to look good all the time. I got to have all the right people around me, the right possessions, the right status, position, all of that. So my life now is all about image because my internal world, which I have pushed to the point of my subconscious and denial, is I really deep down feel like I'm a total loser, but I got to act like I'm better than everybody. So to me, pathological narcissism is a hyper compensation for deep shame that comes out of severe trauma.
Yeah. Tim, before we get to our last topic, where's the best place for people to look for you online?
They can go to our website, timfletcher.ca, or YouTube channel. Just put Tim Fletcher into the YouTube search and it'll come up with all of our videos.
Okay. And we'll put some links in the description for people to check out. And I just want to say, too, we didn't even get into some of the things about manipulation tactics and devaluing and things. And I would just recommend that if people are trying to understand what they're dealing with, that they check out some of your videos on those topics. Extremely valuable, well organized. And Tim, my last topic is really you and this body of work that you have online. What do you hope that people take from your work and your message?
I just want people to get healthy. And I think to me, like, as I look back over my life, I was raised within kind of a very religious system that basically promised a wonderful, healthy life to people. But I was more and more seeing it wasn't delivering what it promised. And then basically getting into the field of psychology and counseling was there's all these different modalities that were promising kind of these things. And then through kind of our Western quick fix mindset, all these people promising instant health by just doing these simple steps. And it's like, no, none of this is delivering. So it sent me on this journey of what does true healthiness look like, and what's the path to actually getting to that with practical tools. And so it's like we're not just physical beings, we're physical, emotional, intellectual, relational, spiritual beings, and we all have needs in all those areas, and we have to learn to meet those needs and relate. And it's just that very long journey that hopefully begins to define what true healthiness looks like and the path to get there. And I think part of it's just growing up in the West and realizing we've got thousands of voices offering remedies and quick fixes and really false advertising. And it's like we got to get past that, but it's resistance in the West to think too deep or too introspectively. We just want a quick little tool handed to us, and it's like, no, you got to do some deep internal work and some deep thinking, and you got to be willing to kind of deconstruct everything and then reconstruct a new picture. And so it's led to a deep joy and satisfaction in my own life that I just really would want others to experience as well.
Yeah. Well, Tim Fletcher, for doing that deep thinking and putting things out in the long form like you do so that people get this nuance, and for taking this interview with me, thank you very much.
My pleasures. Thank you for what you're doing too, Brad.
To help raise awareness about narcissistic abuse, please share this video. It helps a lot.